What is free speech? Is it the same as being able to say anything without repercussions?
Oh, it depends what you mean by repercussions. So, if by repercussions you mean that the state can arrest you and lock you up or fine you, or you can be harassed, threatened, intimidated, pushed out of your job, then no, those are not acceptable repercussions in a liberal society. But if you mean by repercussions, criticism, ridicule, that kind of thing, in other words, more speech in response to your speech, even protest in response to your speech, then of course you have absolutely no right, because when people protest against your form of speech, they're exercising their own free speech. So that is absolutely fine as well. Yeah, I think it's actually quite simple, this point, but this is a point that is missed all the time. It's really straightforward. In a liberal system, a liberal society, and this is something that has been completely overlooked. Anyone should be able to say whatever they want, and then people are able to say what they want in turn in response, and that's how it should work. So when you hear particularly writers for The Guardian talking about how the thing is, when people talk about free speech, what they really mean is they want consequence-free speech. For a start, no one has ever said that. I mean, literally no one has ever said that. So this is an incredible, it's not even so much of a straw man. It's too insubstantial even to be made of straw. There's literally nobody who comes close.
It's the invisible man,
that.
Yeah.
it's the invisible man. Like no one has ever said that they want the right to say whatever they want without someone criticizing them back. No one's ever said that. And if they have, then they're deranged, and we're talking about a fringe group of people. So that has to be put to rest, that overt lie. So no, free speech is the right to say whatever you want, and for people to say whatever they want back to you.
Why does it matter?
Because it is the bedrock of a liberal democracy. It is the foundation of all of our freedoms. There can be no other freedoms. Any progress that has ever been made in terms of the advancement of personal liberty and social liberty has come through the exercise of free speech, of saying what you want, expressing your thoughts. It is the route to personal autonomy. If you can't express what you feel about something, then you cannot develop. We cannot innovate without free speech. There can be no innovation. There has never been innovation without the freedom to say what you want, and particularly to say controversial things. That's how innovation happens. You can't reason without speech, because the very act of reason is typically a collaborative effort. The way that we evolve and learn is through discussion with other people and expressing ideas and getting it wrong and making mistakes, and all of that is part of it. So it is the linchpin of absolutely everything that we value if we value freedom. And that's why it is alarming to me that people are so cavalier about it. I mean, you hear a lot of people online when they want free speech skeptics, I call them, when they call it freeze peach, that really original pun. And they sometimes have an image of a peach frozen in an ice cube. They say, "Oh, look at you with your freeze peach." For a start, it's the most unimaginative. I mean, they should be banned just for criminal unoriginality, right? But they say this stuff. But to be so cavalier about such a foundational principle is actually pretty damn disturbing. It's like they don't care, and they don't realize that they are themselves dependent on their right to free speech in order to behave like dickheads. They need to have that right too. So people shouldn't be so cavalier about it.
Doesn't free speech allow those dickheads to cause harm and offence, though, and other dickheads as well?
Yeah, that's the point. They can. I'm not here suggesting. Again, this would be the interpretation, wouldn't it? Oh, you've just mocked people who use the phrase "freeze peach," and therefore you're trying to shut them down, aren't you? You're trying to silence them. You're trying to censor them. No, criticism is not the same as censorship. I often think that people who mistake the two must be doing so willfully. They have to be. I mean, how else could they? Everyone knows this. So I often get that as well. Like when I've mocked things in the past, people have said to me, "Oh, why are you having to go there? I thought you cared about free speech." I always get this all the time. It's like, yeah, I'm exercising my free speech to criticize what they said. That's kind of how it works, and they can do it back to me. That's fine. It's okay. I think one of the reasons I wrote the book is fundamentally there are so many misconceptions around free speech, that so many basic misconceptions, that really people should have learned about a long time ago, and you're always having to fend them off. And I just like to put those things to rest. And I think people need to have a sort of more sensible conception of what is meant by the concept of free speech. And so most of the arguments around this topic are dealing with straw men, and they're dealing with misconceptions. And so if you can just get beyond all that detritus, then we can have a discussion about the actual issues, because there are some very difficult issues surrounding the topic. But we're not going to get anywhere if people don't know what free speech means.
So
so that's one of the reasons I wanted to.
I learned about ethics and meta-ethics from a buddy who's at Oxford Uni, and I'd never learned this before. And what he told me was that if you have two people trying to debate ethics who disagree on meta-ethics, the ethical discussion actually breaks down because the underlying principles that they're coming to the table holding don't support any sort of discussion on top of that. And it seems like you're trying to sort of do this here. Like, look, this is the battleground that we're supposedly playing on. Yeah, we can now have a conversation, any kind of either productive or unproductive, but at least we can have a conversation because we know the rules of the game.
It's exactly right. And actually, I've been wrestling with this issue for a while now, is how do you argue against those who are incapable of argument? This is really hard because I think we need more discussion, not less. I think I think one of the major problems, and I think I've said it to you before, one of the major problems that we face at the moment is people aren't talking to each other. People from opposing political ideas, they're not sitting down and talking to each other. So I'm all for doing that, and I will always do that. But if someone comes into the room and wants to talk, but they're not going to play by the rules, right? In other words, they're going to just throw insults. In other words, they're going to start guessing what they think you believe. Right, which is something they always do. They're going to misrepresent your perspective. In other words, they're just arguing with a version of themselves that they've created. If they're going to do that, then that's bad faith. You can't actually argue with someone like that. And I think it's really important when it comes to argument that yes, you make an effort, go out of your way to talk to people who disagree with you. But if they are unwilling or incapable of argumentation, then don't bother and block them. I seriously mean, I think, and you might say, well, you're creating an echo chamber. Well, look, someone comes in and says, there are 32 letters in the alphabet. Let's debate. Well, I'm not going to debate that person because, it's clearly not the case. And if they absolutely refuse to accept the basic premise, you just can't go any further than that. I had this the other day where someone on Twitter was on at me saying, saying everyone in this country just accepts that, or just uses they all the time as a singular pronoun, right? We'd already passed the point of, where you do it if you don't know the gender of the person. And that's something that's a colloquial form of the term they. But the idea that the vast majority of people do not understand they as a plural pronoun is simply not true. And the only way you would think that is the case is if you don't know people or if you're being willfully obtuse in order to win the argument. So therefore, I'm not going to debate that person. You have to accept certain premises in order to move on. And one of them is just knowing how to argue.
Why is it mostly people on the right who seem to be promoting freedom of speech? Like, we rarely hear the left complain about lacking free speech.
Well, the opposite was true when I was a child. So this is something that I think shows us that it's not a partisan issue. When I was a kid, there used to be, you're too young, but there were things like the Daily Mail and the Daily Express, I think, had a campaign to try and ban David Cronenberg's film Crash. There were all sorts of campaigns every now and then. Whenever there was, go back even before my time, there were campaigns against things like The Last Temptation of Christ, the Scorsese film, or Last Tango in Paris. So there's always these sort of censorious kind of campaigns going on and say that we should ban artistic expression of one form or another. But it was always coming from the right. When I was a kid, it was always, you just associate, then if you think of Mary Whitehouse, who was the famous campaigner who did the Clean Up TV campaign back in the 60s and 70s, and then the Video Nasties campaign in the 80s. In the 80s, they banned films like Driller Killer and Evil Dead was banned, the Sam Raimi film. That was banned by the Video Nasties scandal. And all of this was coming from the right. This was just the way that, because conservatives traditionally have a sort of, I suppose, a kind of old-fashioned view of decorum and that kind of thing, but they all bought into this myth, which was very much Mary Whitehouse's thing, that popular entertainment has the capacity to corrupt the masses, and it was a kind of very snobbish idea that basically suggested that poor people were like robots who just do what they just see stuff and they react. Okay, that exact philosophy and idea is now predominantly expressed by those on the left. It's a weird shift. It's difficult to determine when exactly it happened, but you'll notice that all calls for sort of artistic censorship or all criticism, which is saying, well, why hasn't this film got more diversity or representation, or why is this film sending a negative message about women or a negative message about gay people or whatever it might be? When, of course, the role of art, it has absolutely nothing to do with messages or morality necessarily. Not that art can't have a moral message if it wants to, but it always puts me off when it does. I find it quite rebarbative as a form. But This is now coming always from the Guardian, always from the New Statesman, always from the leftist publication. This is just where it is now. This very haughty puritanical approach, this pearl clutching would be the phrase. It's a very good phrase, isn't it? Because you really imagine people going, very camp, very kind of, this person said this rude, disgusting thing. It's just shifted, and it will no doubt shift back again. Every now and then you get it from the right. Even now, you get it when certain creative people do something that is considered offensive, and you'll get that, and that will always happen. It's just a strange phenomenon that at the moment the ones who would seek to shut down forms of expression tend to be on the left, and of course that is largely down to the new social justice movement, which at its heart mistrusts speech and sees speech as violence and conflates the two things, and pretty much everyone within that camp, I mean, there are disagreements along the way, but pretty much everyone is of the view that language has the capacity to normalize behavior, and that people do follow these mechanical cues, from these mechanical linguistic cues, and ultimately that's down to a mistrust of humanity, and particularly a mistrust of working class people. That's what you'll find, which is why they often go after working class comics, because it's the audiences that are dangerous. They won't go after a middle class comic talking about various things, because they're better educated audience. They understand what they're doing. There is a deep snobbery,
very patronizing, isn't it? This sort of odd,
incredible,
paternalistic, like kind of overbearing, like nanny, like neo-nanny state in a really bizarre way.
There was an article when the Dapper Laughs, you remember the Dapper Laughs controversy?
Is he still around?
I have absolutely no idea, but they succeeded in having his TV show booted off, I think it was ITV2, and there was a really alarmist, ludicrous article online talking about how his show was a rapist's almanac they used. I don't think they used that word correctly. But it was absolutely insane. And actually, the whole article was hilarious because he'd obviously gone through his thesaurus and just tried to sound as learned as possible, but actually, by doing so, came across as incredibly unlettered. But when he wrote this article, and people, but it wasn't just that he wrote. I mean, you can have some maniacs writing articles about this sort of stuff, but so many people bought into it, and even comedians I know signed this open letter saying we should have this banned. It was a weird moment. Although I have to say, some of those who I know who did that now regret it. But of course, the idea, it was really because Dapper Laugh's audience were working class, and this idea that they would watch him picking up girls and being a cheeky lad or whatever. I mean, look, it's not to my taste. I don't even know what it was. Really. I watched a bit of it and I thought it's not for me, But I don't think for a second that some working class guys are going to watch it and think, all right, I've got permission now to go out and commit some sexual assault. Incredible. This it is just patronizing, isn't it? It is just a fear of people who aren't like you. It's because, believe it or not, it doesn't matter what class you come from. Everyone knows the difference between a joke and real life. And even if it were an outright instruction to behave badly, people do have agency. They do make decisions. They don't just do things because someone tells them. But this is a belief that we can't get over because it's so ingrained now. It's everywhere. It comes down to even in Parliament, when Boris Johnson was using the metaphor of the surrender bill, and you had all these Labour MPs saying that your language is normalising violence. People are going to hear you using military metaphors. Well, political language is full of military metaphors. Conflict, we go on to fight, we need strength, all of this sort of stuff. But it's interpreted as incitement, right? Well, again, this is based on a very patronising view of humanity. It's not true.